Good evening, friends. Tonight, we are hosting a dinner party that travels through time and space to take a look at the dining tables of Tsarist Russia in that era, both opulent and rustic, full of contradictions, and see what kind of delicacies people actually had on their plates. Now, dim the lights, and accompanied by the sound of bells, let us enter tonight's story together. You are now inside a small wooden cabin. The air is filled with the crackling sound of burning wood and a distinctive aroma of food. That smell is the smell of chic cabbage soup, no matter which door you walk through in Tsarist Russia. From the poorest peasant's humble hut to the most magnificent palace in St. Petersburg, you can almost always catch this scent. It is like an invisible thread connecting people of all social classes across this vast empire. The history of this dish is older than the very name Russia itself. As early as the 9th century AD, when cabbage, that miraculous vegetable, was introduced to this land from the Byzantine Empire, the prototype of cabbage soup was born. Why did it earn the title of national dish? The answer is simple: practicality. Cabbage is cold-resistant, high-yielding, and easy to store. It was practically tailor-made for this harsh land. So, regardless of wealth or poverty, no one's table was complete without it. However, although everyone drank something called cabbage soup, the contents of the pot were worlds apart. If you lean in close to this peasant's pot, what you see might be the most humble version, what historians call poor man's cabbage soup. Inside, there is only chopped cabbage, a few slices of onion, and perhaps some carrot or millet. The broth is plain water, thickened with a tiny bit of lard or rye flour to add calories. This bowl of soup represented the bare minimum of survival. But if you could instantly teleport to a nobleman's estate, the kitchen there would be simmering rich man's cabbage soup. The pot would be churning with large chunks of beef or pork, the broth rich and dark, with fresh herbs, and a bowl of snow-white sour cream prepared on the side, ready to be dolloped in generously before drinking. That single spoonful of sour cream was like an invisible wall, separating two worlds. So you see, a humble bowl of cabbage soup was actually an honest mirror, clearly reflecting each person's social standing. You didn't need to look at someone's clothes or house, just look at their soup bowl, and you could tell how they were doing. This was a sociology written on the menu, performed every single day. Even more fascinating, this soup was also portable food. During the long winters, people would pour cooked cabbage soup into molds and leave them outside to freeze into massive soup ice bricks. When travelers had to set out on a long journey, they would take one of these bricks along, like carrying a stone. When hungry on the road, they would chop off a chunk from the ice brick with an axe, toss it into a pot, light a fire to melt it, and just like that, a hot meal was ready. The image is both poignant and hardcore, brimming with the survival wisdom of the Russian spirit. The cabbage soup in the pot is still bubbling away, but your gaze is drawn to another clay bowl on the table. Inside sits a deep brown, distinctly granular substance, sending up modest wisps of steam and emitting an aroma of nuts and toasted bread blended together. This is the other half of the Russian table's soul, kasha. If cabbage soup is flowing poetry, then kasha is solid earth. A proverb passed down through centuries sums it up perfectly. She and kasha are our food. Kasha is actually a collective term, referring broadly to any porridge or cooked grain dish. It can be millet, barley, or oats. But in the hearts of Russians, the one true kasha is specifically the one made from buckwheat. Before potatoes became widespread in the 18th century, buckwheat kasha was the primary source of calories for the vast majority of people on this land, a truly motherly grain. It was cheap, filling, and extremely simple to prepare. Just buckwheat and water, plus a small pinch of salt and a pat of butter, and you could conjure up a bowl of warm happiness. Watch as the housewife gently fluffs the buckwheat in the bowl. With a fork, each grain maintains its complete shape, loose and fluffy. Behind this lies a small culinary secret, the traditional method is not to simply throw buckwheat into water and boil it. More particular families would first crack an egg and thoroughly mix the raw buckwheat grains with the egg wash, then slowly stir-fry them in a dry pan. The egg wash forms a thin protective coating on the surface of each buckwheat grain. During the toasting process, the grains go from clumping together to gradually separating, becoming distinct grain by grain, while releasing a richer roasted aroma. Only then is water or broth added for cooking, and the resulting kasha won't be mushy. The texture will also be sheerier. You might think such plain food surely belongs only to common folk. But interestingly, kasha has also graced the most exalted halls in Russian history. For instance, on the coronation banquet menu of the last Tsar, Nicholas II, there was a kasha made from pearl barley. And the legendary ballerina Maya Plissetskaya even credited eating pearl barley kasha as her secret to maintaining her beauty. It's as if you discovered that an international superstar's beauty regimen was simply drinking millet porridge every day, full of wonderful contrast. This reverence for kasha actually stems from even more ancient beliefs. In the pagan era before the arrival of Christianity, buckwheat was considered a gift from the earth, mother goddess, a sacred food. Therefore, kasha was not merely for filling the stomach. It was deeply woven into every important ritual in people's lives. In ancient times, wedding kasha was eaten at weddings, symbolizing fertility and abundant descendants. At infant baptisms, there was the godparents' kasha. Even at funerals, there was a special sweet kasha called kutya, used to commemorate the deceased, as if kasha could accompany a person's soul through the entire journey from birth to death. You pick up a wooden spoon and scoop up a spoonful of warm kasha. The solid texture and warm aroma make you instantly understand why Russians say, "Kasha is our mother." It truly is like a mother, silent, reliable, nourishing the people of this land for thousands of years in the simplest way. Just when you think you've cracked the code of the Russian table, nothing more than an endless loop of cabbage soup and kasha, you realize you've overlooked the most powerful variable. An invisible hand that you can neither see nor touch, yet which dictates everyone's menu, the Russian Orthodox Church calendar. Imagine this. You're about to enjoy a bowl of rich man's cabbage soup with sour cream and beef, when suddenly, the church bells ring out, announcing the beginning of Great Lent. In an instant, the beef in your bowl, the sour cream, even the meat broth used to make the soup all become forbidden. Welcome to the other side of Russian cuisine, a world governed by devout faith and strict religious precepts. During the Tsarist era, ordinary people's daily rhythms followed the church. According to Orthodox regulations, approximately 200 days a year, even more than half were fasting days. On these days, all animal-derived foods, meat, eggs, dairy products were strictly prohibited. This was not merely ascetic discipline for monks. It was a rule that everyone, from the Tsar down to the serfs, had to observe. Therefore, the Russian kitchen actually maintained two completely parallel cooking systems. One was for non-fasting days, rich, oily dishes. The other was for fasting days, light, meatless fare. This strict fasting system greatly stimulated the culinary creativity of the Russian people. When meat and dairy couldn't be used, people had to find delicious alternatives from the land and rivers. Thus, mushrooms, various pickled vegetables, fish, and grains became the stars of the fasting menu. On fasting days, you would eat cabbage soup, made with a mushroom broth base. Pies would be stuffed with mashed potatoes or sautéed cabbage instead of minced meat. This wasn't just about filling stomachs. It was about creating some variety and pleasure during the long, monotonous fasting periods. One could say that it was precisely these austere religious precepts that gave birth to the most rustic, most earthy essence of Russian cuisine. Even more interesting is that within Russian Orthodoxy, there existed an even more hardcore group, the Old Believers. They split off in the 17th century, in opposition to church reforms, and were known for their extremely conservative and strict way of life. Their fasting was even stricter than that of mainstream Orthodox Christians, and they even developed a unique set of food taboos. When mainstream society began accepting the novelties that Peter the Great introduced from the West, the Old Believers regarded them as impure. For example, they considered potatoes to be the devil's apple because they grew underground and were therefore evil. They refused to drink tea and coffee, considering these to be heathen beverages. They were even suspicious of sugar, believing it was purified using ox blood or egg whites, and therefore avoided it entirely. In the Old Believers' world, what one ate and didn't eat was not merely a dietary habit. It was a serious matter of distinguishing friend from foe and upholding one's faith. Even a person's body weight became a marker of faith. Obesity was seen as a symbol of straying from the faith and gluttonous indulgence, while thinness represented piety and holiness. So when you look at that simple bowl of cabbage soup again, you'll understand that behind it may lie a complex religious calendar. Whether there is meat in the bowl is not only a symbol of wealth or poverty, it may also be a marker of whether today is a fasting day. The Russian table thus swings like a pendulum between feast and fast regularly year after year. If meat cannot be eaten on fasting days, then where does protein come from? The answer lies hidden in the vast, boundless forest beyond the village. Now, you follow the villagers, carrying a wicker basket, and quietly step into the birch forest. Beneath your feet are soft fallen leaves and moss. The air is filled with the fresh scent of damp earth and decay. There is no noise here, only the rustling of wind through the leaves. Welcome to another national pastime of the Russian people. Mushroom foraging, what they call the quiet hunt. For Russians, mushroom foraging is far more than simply picking up something to eat. It is a skill cultivated from childhood, a ritual of communing with nature, a cultural tradition embedded deep in the bones. Every Russian, regardless of age or gender, seems to possess an innate ability to identify mushrooms. They can tell you which mushroom is called Elysichkan, what we call the chanterelle, because it has the orange-yellow color of fox fur. Which one is the Tsar's mushroom, the famous porcini, with thick, meaty flesh, regarded as the king of mushrooms. And then there are those that grow under birch trees, podberezovik, and those that grow under aspen trees and podosinovik, their very names telling you where to find them. You imitate their movements, bending down, parting the damp ferns and decaying leaves, eyes scanning close to the ground. It's like a game of hide and seek with the forest. The forest hides its treasures under tree roots and in the moss. And you need sufficient patience and luck to discover them. Experienced foragers will tell you to use a sharp little knife to cut the mushroom at its base rather than pulling it up by the roots. This way you protect the underground mycelium, allowing mushrooms to grow in the same spot again next year. This is a simple ecological wisdom passed down through generations, a form of respect for the forest's gifts. Of course, the forest is also full of dangerous temptations. Many poisonous mushrooms look almost identical to their edible twins. Folk remedies for detecting poison have therefore circulated widely. For instance, one widely spread old grandmother's tale says to boil the collected mushrooms together with an onion. If the broth turns blue or black, it means there are poisonous mushrooms among them. This sounds quite logical, but in fact has no scientific basis whatsoever. It is merely a beautiful legend. True foraging experts rely on knowledge and experience passed down through generations. They only pick species they are 100% certain are safe. For peasant families, this quiet hunt was far more than a weekend pastime. It was a critically important economic activity. In an era with little cash trade, forest mushrooms were hard currency. They could not only provide necessary protein for the table during fasting periods, filling the gap left by meat, but any surplus mushrooms could also be pickled or dried, becoming provisions for the entire winter, or even taken to the market to trade for salt, cloth, and other daily necessities. One could say the forest was the peasant's second garden and bank. This bounty from nature provided an important buffer and safeguard for the fragile agricultural economy. You carry a basket brimming with porcini and chanterelles and walk out of the forest, content. The setting sun stretches the shadows of the birch forest long. The basket in your hand is heavy, not just with the weight of food, but with a grounded, abundant sense of security that comes from the land. You return to the wooden cabin with a full basket of forest boils, but the quiet hunt is actually only half complete. The freshest mushrooms must be processed within 24 hours, or they will spoil. Now, the real test begins: how to transform this brief, bountiful gift into reserves that can withstand the long winter. Welcome to another core skill of the Russian kitchen: food preservation. The air is soon permeated with a new, more complex aroma: the saltiness of salt, the sourness of vinegar, the pungent fragrance of garlic and dill, mingled with the earthy scent of the mushrooms themselves. You watch as the housewife sorts the mushrooms into several piles, preparing to process them using different methods. This is the crystallized wisdom of Russians fighting against their harsh natural environment, a deeply ingrained instinct to prepare for what lies ahead. One of the most common methods is drying. People would string up thick-fleshed mushrooms like porcini, one by one on coarse thread, like strings of peculiar necklaces, then hang them above the warm, dry Russian stove. The stove's residual heat would slowly, gently draw out the moisture from the mushrooms, concentrating their flavor to the utmost. Months later, on a bitterly cold winter day, taking down a few dried mushroom pieces to rehydrate and stew into cabbage soup would instantly awaken the entire house with the forest fragrance of late summer and early autumn. Another more flavorful method is pickling, which itself is divided into two mainstream techniques. One is the brining method, soaking and fermenting in salt water. The other is the vinegar method, flavoring with vinegar, sugar, and spices. The brining method is older and more rustic, relying on the natural fermentation of lactic acid bacteria. The finished product has a salty, savory flavor with a distinctive, sour tang brought by fermentation. The vinegar method is more like a quick preparation. The finished product is crisp with a sweet, sour taste. The most interesting and ritualistic method you'll see is an ancient mushroom pickling technique from the Altai region. Instead of ordinary clay pots, they use specially made cedarwood barrels. Before pickling, the barrel must be scalded with boiling water infused with juniper branches, wormwood, and mint, using the fragrance of plants to purify the barrel. Then the bottom of the barrel is lined with a layer of salt, black currant leaves, and mature dried dill. Next, the prepared mushrooms, usually saffron milk caps, are placed capside down in neat layers. With each layer, a sprinkling of medium-grain sea salt, a few cloves of garlic and allspice are added. Once full, the top is covered with more blackcurrant leaves and dill, then sealed with a clean cloth and weighed down with a heavy granite stone. After a few days, the mushrooms release water and shrink under the pressure of the salt and stone. At this point, more mushrooms are added until the entire barrel is packed tightly. Finally, the barrel is moved to the cellar and placed on blocks of ice for storage. 1 to 2 months later, a barrel of salt-cured mushrooms condensing the essence of the forest and the artisan's craft is born. These food preservation techniques are not unique to Russia, but here they were developed to the highest degree. Behind this lies the survival pressure imposed by the harsh climate and long winters. When the temperature outside plunges to dozens of degrees below zero, the land is covered in ice and snow, and not a single fresh vegetable can be found. Those rows of jars in the cellar filled with pickled cucumbers, pickled tomatoes, sauerkraut, and pickled mushrooms become a family's entire source of vitamins and the hope on their table throughout the winter. These preserved foods were not merely emergency reserves for getting through winter. They profoundly shaped Russia's taste preferences. That love for sour and salty flavors is almost innate. When you grow up eating sour pickles and drinking sauerkraut soup from childhood, your taste buds associate that sour salty flavor with home and a sense of security. So the famous Russian dishes that came later, such as solyanka with its sour salty flavor profile, and rasolnik sour pickle soup, their flavor foundations actually come from those jars in the cellar. One could say that the distinctive flavors of Russian cuisine grew right out of those jars battling against time. During the quiet hunt in the forest, besides mushrooms, there is another equally enticing treasure. Unlike mushrooms, which require painstaking searching, these grow in vast carpets across forest clearings, like rugs studded with red gemstones. Now, you kneel on soft moss, gently part the dark green leaves with your fingers, and one by one, glistening berries as red as carnelian are revealed. This is the lingonberry. Russians call it ibrizhnika, like mushroom foraging. Berry picking is also an important family activity for Russians during the summer and autumn seasons. People bring their children, carry little buckets, and spend the better part of a day in the forest. Besides lingonberries, there are blueberries, cranberries, and wild strawberries fragrant among the grass. These generous gifts from nature are brought home to be made into jam, juice, or a traditional berry drink called a morse. Roasted game or venison paired with a spoonful of sweet and sour lingonberry sauce is a classic combination in Russian cuisine, using the tartness of the berries to balance the richness of the meat. The lingonberry holds a special place in Russian culture, not only because it's delicious, but also because of its unique ability to self-preserve. This brings us to a very ancient and remarkably wise berry preservation method, born in an era when sugar was more expensive than gold. In the past, when ordinary families didn't have enough sugar to make jam, they would simply place freshly picked lingonberries directly into clean glass jars, fill them with cold water, and seal them. Just like that, without any additives, these water-soaked lingonberries could keep until the following spring. This sounds almost unbelievable, because most fruits would quickly ferment and rot if left soaking in water. But lingonberries are an exception. Their flesh naturally contains a high concentration of benzoic acid, a powerful natural preservative. It is precisely this substance that inhibits microbial growth, allowing lingonberries to peacefully survive the winter in plain water. This lingonberry water was not only a food but also an important folk remedy. During the long winter, when fresh fruits and vegetables vanished entirely, people relied on it to supplement their vitamins and prevent scurvy. You taste a freshly picked lingonberry. A strong sour flavor instantly explodes in your mouth, but it is followed by a trace of sweet aftertaste. This taste is like the land itself, harsh and biting at first. But if you are patient enough, you will always find a resilient sweetness hidden within. You return from the forest fully loaded, and the kitchen once again becomes a hive of activity. Some of the berries are made into lingonberry water that will keep through the entire winter, while the rest are to be transformed into something sweeter, something more delightful. Now the air is no longer filled with the sour salty scent of pickled vegetables, but a rich warm sweetness that could melt one's very soul. You are witnessing the birth of two iconic Russian sweets, vareny and ipastali. First, you watch as the housewife tends to a large basin of fully ripe strawberries. She carefully places them into a copper pot, then layers them one layer of strawberries, one layer of sugar. This is the beginning of making hearty, what we now know as fruit preserves. Its essence lies in preserving the complete shape of each fruit or berry. The finished product is not a blurred mass of fruit puree, but individual glistening fruits floating in clear syrup, like specimens in amber. To achieve this effect, the process requires immense patience. The fruit and sugar mixture cannot be cooked all the way through in one go. Instead, it must be repeatedly and briefly heated, then cooled, then heated again, then cooled again. This process may take several days. Each heating allows the sugar to penetrate deeper into the fruit's interior, while each cooling allows the fruit's cell walls to remain firm and intact, preventing them from collapsing under high heat. It is a cooking method that gently collaborates with time. In ancient times before sugar was available, people used honey to make this ancestral version of fruit preserves. The finished product was an indispensable feature of the Russian tea ceremony. People would serve it in small crystal dishes, and using a dainty little silver spoon, scoop a bit into their black tea in place of a sugar cube, or eat it directly alongside tea, savoring the pure sweetness of summer. Meanwhile, on the other side of the kitchen, an even more ancient and labor-intensive project is underway. This is the making of ipastellade. It is translated as fruit paste, but this word hardly does justice to its wonder. Its texture is not tough like fruit leather, but light as cotton candy, soft as meringue. It melts in the mouth, leaving behind only pure fruit fragrance. Its main ingredient is sour apples, such as the famous Antonovka variety. People would first bake the apples until soft, then painstakingly mash and strain the flesh through a sieve to produce a fine puree. Then honey or sugar and a large quantity of egg whites would be added, and the long beating process would begin. In an era without electric mixers, this work was done entirely by hand. In a nobleman's estate, you might see several serfs taking turns, beating a large basin of apple puree without interruption using wooden spoons or birch whisks. This process sometimes lasted a full 2 days, that is, 48 hours, until the puree became snow-white, fluffy, and expanded several times in volume. The beaten puree would be spread flat in wooden frames and placed inside the Russian stove. After the fire was extinguished, the stable, lingering residual heat would slowly, over a long period, bake it. The finished pastilla resembled thick, spongy blocks, which were cut into squares and stacked layer upon layer in lindenwood boxes, where they could keep for a very long time in dry conditions. This confection was complex in technique, time-consuming, and labor-intensive. During the Tsarist era, it was a luxury that only the nobility could afford. Now, we must temporarily leave that rustic wooden cottage filled with the scents of earth and berry. Take a deep breath, because we are about to make a leap through time and space. The scene before your eyes begins to blur and spin. The birch forests and farmland vanish, replaced by a vast construction site. This is the swampy banks of the Neva River in the early 18th century. A giant named Peter, standing over 2 meters tall, is building an entirely new city from nothing with his iron will St. Petersburg. And what he intended to build was not merely a city, but an entirely new Russia. You walk into a newly completed Baroque-style palace. Gone is the warmth of the Russian stove. In its place are high ceilings, enormous glass windows, and cold stone floors. The scent drifting through the air is no longer the familiar aroma of cabbage soup and black bread, but something foreign in a blend of butter, spices, and wine. Welcome to Peter the Great's table, a taste battlefield being forcibly westernized. Peter the Great's reforms were thorough, even brutal. He not only required the nobles to shave off their traditional beards and don tight-fitting Western European clothing, but also to change their eating habits. He regarded the ancient Russian diet as a symbol of barbarism and backwardness, to push Russia into the ranks of European great powers. Everything had to align with the West, and so a top-down dietary revolution began. Wealthy nobles were sent to Western Europe on study missions. When they returned, they brought back not only new architectural blueprints and political ideas, but also foreign chefs. Suddenly, chefs from Germany, the Netherlands, and Austria became the darlings of St. Petersburg high society, bringing entirely new cooking techniques and dishes. The Russian noble's table began to feature things previously unheard of: meat patties made from minced meat, casseroles, and aspic. German sandwiches and Dutch cheese also became fashionable foods. This transformation was so profound that it even affected the language. Before Peter the Great, the Russian language had no precise equivalent for the word soup. All hot liquid dishes were collectively called ichapokliopkong, a word that sounds inherently rustic and earthy. The word soupe was borrowed directly from French or German. Imagine, A nation having to rename one of the staple foods it had eaten for over 1,000 years, using a foreign word. This alone speaks to the intensity of this cultural shock. Of course, this culinary revolution only took place among the upper classes. The vast peasant population saw virtually no impact on their lives or eating habits. They continued, day after day, to drink their cabbage soup and eat their kasha, strictly observing the church's fasting calendar. Thus, in 18th century Russia, food became a clear social dividing line. Nobles ate Western cuisine prepared by foreign chefs, striving to imitate European table manners as a way of displaying their civilization and loyalty to the Tsar. Meanwhile, traditional Russian food was branded with the label of country folk. This also triggered a long-running debate. What was the fundamental purpose of Peter the Great's Westernization reform? Was it a genuine desire to lead Russia toward modernization? Or was it a heavy-handed political tool designed to destroy the traditional power base of the old nobility and cultivate a new, Western-minded elite loyal only to him personally? Regardless of the motive, the dining table undeniably became the front line of this cultural struggle. What you ate and how you ate became a form of political statement. You clumsily cut a piece of German-style meat patty with your knife and fork, perhaps still yearning in your heart for the black bread and sour pickles of home. But you must eat it, because it represents progress, loyalty, and the future. Food, at this moment, has transcended its mere gustatory meaning and become a weighty political symbol. The window to the West that Peter the Great opened had, by the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century, become a wide-open door that could no longer be shut. If the Peter era introduced a mixed, predominantly German-Dutch Western European atmosphere, then starting from the era of Catherine the Great, a more powerful, more refined, and more dominant culinary current swept through Russian noble society. French haute cuisine. Now you find yourself in a brilliantly lit palace in St. Petersburg. The long dining table is draped with snow-white tablecloths, set with gleaming silver cutlery and crystal wine glasses. The air is filled with the aroma of truffles, butter, and fine wine. In the kitchen, a slight-framed Frenchman wearing a tall white chef's hat issues commands in heavily accented Russian. In 19th century Russia, having a French chef was the ultimate status symbol a noble family could imagine. The French master chefs brought an entirely new culinary philosophy. They were no longer content with simply roasting meat or boiling it tender. Instead, they introduced refined cutting techniques, complex sauce making, and an exacting pursuit of ingredient pairings. The menus of Russian nobles began to feature an increasing number of elegant French terms, gage de veau, y'entrecôte, while potatoes and tomatoes too, relatively new vegetables in Russia, were extensively used by French chefs to prepare side dishes, greatly enriching the table's colors and flavors. This era also produced a legendary figure, who could be called the Emperor among chefs, Marie-Antoine Carême. He is considered one of the founding fathers of modern haute cuisine, and worked for royal courts across Europe, including a brief stint serving Tsar Alexander I. Carême was not just a culinary master but also a theorist. It is said that he popularized the trend of naming new dishes after noble patrons. This practice both satisfied the vanity of the aristocracy and brought renown to the chef himself. Many famous Franco-Russian fusion dishes that emerged later followed this tradition. However, this French invasion was not a simple case of cultural copying. Although French chefs brought advanced techniques and concepts, they also had to confront Russian realities. They had to work with local ingredients: succulent sturgeon, tenda, wild game, forest mushrooms, and berries. They also had to cater to the deeply rooted Russian palate of the nobility. Many nobles, though proud to enjoy French cuisine in public, may have privately longed for a steaming bowl of cabbage soup or a hearty piece of black bread. And so, an interesting fusion began. French chefs started using their techniques to transform and elevate traditional Russian dishes. They would use refined French meat stock to cook borscht or pair roasted mushrooms with delicate cream sauces. The most successful example of this fusion was the lavish upgrading of the Russian anzhakoski, the appetizer spread. The French combined the various pâtés, aspics, and salads they brought with traditional Russian pickled cucumbers, marinated mushrooms, salted fish, and caviar, vastly expanding the variety and opulence of the appetizer course. The result was a one-of-a-kind appetizer format that combined French refinement with Russian exuberance. You gaze upon the exquisite dishes on the table. They have the appearance of French cuisine, but may conceal a Russian soul within. This feeling is perhaps the truest portrait of the inner world of Russian nobles of that era. Their lifestyles, their language, their very thoughts like this meal were a wondrous hybrid. While you are immersed in the elegance of French cuisine, you might overlook a deeper, more revolutionary change. This change lies not in the food on the plate, but in how the food is brought to the table. Now, imagine you are a time traveler invited to two top-tier aristocratic dinners. The first is in 18th century Paris, the moment you walk into the banquet hall. You are stunned. The enormous table is already laden with dozens of dishes, like miniature mountains, roasted meats, pies, vegetables, sauces, a dazzling array, emanating tantalizing aromas. This is the most popular dining style in Europe at the time. Service à la Française, French service. All dishes are brought out simultaneously, like a grand buffet. Guests serve themselves based on their position, taking whatever food is nearest to them. The advantage of this style is that the spectacle is extraordinarily impressive, fully displaying the host's wealth and generosity. But the drawbacks are equally obvious. While you're still drinking your soup, the roast at the far end of the table is already slowly going cold, and you likely cannot even reach the dish you most want to eat at the other end of the table. Now, fast forward to mid-19th century St. Petersburg. You walk into the banquet hall again, but find the long dining table completely empty, adorned only with flowers, candelabras, and a few cold dishes. Just as you feel puzzled, a line of servants files in. They approach each guest and present the first course, a bowl of piping hot soup. Once the soup is finished, the plates are cleared. Then comes the second course, perhaps fish, then the third, the fourth. All dishes are brought out sequentially, one by one, portioned and delivered to you by the servants. This is a service à la Russian service. The course-by-course dining experience you enjoy at any Western restaurant today has its roots right here. This was the most important and most enduring contribution of Tsarist Russia to world dining culture. This dining style was first introduced to Paris around 1810 by Prince Kurakin, the Russian ambassador to France. Initially, Parisians found this novel way of eating quite surprising, even somewhat dismissive. Even the great French chef Carême, after witnessing this service style at the Russian court in 1818, considered it too rigid and unsuitable for refined French sensibilities. But the advantages of Russian service were overwhelming. First, it ensured that every dish was steaming hot when presented to the guest. Second, it guaranteed that every guest could taste every dish on the menu, achieving a true democracy of gastronomy. More importantly, it completely shifted the focus of the dinner. In French service, the star was the food-laden table, a visual feast, like a still life painting. In Russian service, the star became each individual dish's flavor, temperature, and texture. This elevated the chef's skill and creativity to an unprecedented level. A dinner was no longer merely a display of wealth, it became a carefully choreographed gustatory drama, with an arc of introduction, development, climax, and resolution. The next time you're at a restaurant and watch the server clear your appetizer plate and present a steaming main course, you can smile knowingly, because what you're experiencing is Russian service, which traveled from the palaces of St. Petersburg to the world in the 19th century. This dining sequence, which we now take entirely for granted, was once a revolutionary upheaval. and its origin lies in that distant, ice-covered land. Before you experience the revolutionary Russian service formal dinner, you are first led into a separate room, or a corner of the banquet hall. Here, you will witness an even freer, noisier, and more distinctly Russian feast the world of cuisine. Before your eyes are one or several long tables, densely packed with all manner of small saucers, bowls, and plates. A dazzling, colorful array, like a food carnival. This is the Russian appetizer spread, but calling it appetizers or hors d'oeuvre is a gross understatement. It is more like a full meal before the meal. At the center of the table usually stands one or several bottles of ice-cold vodka, their surfaces frosted with a layer of white condensation. Surrounded by their loyal companions, thinly sliced black bread and white bread, crystal bowls filled with glistening black or red caviar, various smoked and cured fish, oily sprats, plump sturgeon and salmon, piles of cold cuts ham, smoked sausage and boiled beef tongue, and countless pickled items, pickled cucumbers, pickled mushrooms, pickled tomatoes, and sauerkraut. Naturally, there are also several carefully prepared salads and warm little pies. In Russian drinking culture, vodka comes with a fixed ritual. People first deliver a passionate or heartfelt toast, then raise their small glasses and drink it all in one gulp. Immediately after, to counteract the vodka's intensity, one must eat something right away, preferably something salty, sour, or oily. A piece of buttered black bread, a slice of sour pickle, or a sprat are all excellent choices, and virtually every food on the table exists for this purpose. You hold a small glass of vodka and wander before the magnificent spread. You first taste a bite of briny caviar, then pick up a crisp pickled mushroom. Around you, guests chat and laugh easily, and the crystal clear clink of glasses accompanies each toast. You understand now. This is not merely the beginning of a meal, it is itself a complete feast. In the most direct, most abundant way possible, it sets a warm, cheerful, and pleasantly tipsy tone for the long evening ahead. Among the dazzling array of dishes and the subsequent hot courses of the formal dinner, you might encounter a dish whose name is famous the world over. Beef stroganoff. This dish could be called the most renowned offspring of Franco-Russian culinary fusion. The basic definition of this dish is simple: pieces or strips of beef quickly cooked in a sauce containing sour cream and mustard. Everyone agrees that its name comes from the Stroganov family, an extremely wealthy and powerful noble dynasty of 19th century Russia. But the question is, which Count Stroganov exactly, and under what circumstances, gave rise to this dish? Several versions of the story circulate, each like a brilliant short play. The first and most widely known, most dramatically rich version we might call the Legend of the Toothless Count. According to this tale, the Count was advanced in age and had lost all his teeth, making it impossible for him to chew large steaks. His thoughtful chef therefore invented this dish, cutting the beef into small, soft, thin slices and braising them in a rich sauce so the Count could enjoy delicious meat without the effort of chewing. The second version is the frozen beef legend. The protagonist here is the diplomat Pavel Stroganov. Supposedly, during a journey through the bitterly cold wilderness of Siberia, his accompanying chef discovered that the beef they had brought was frozen solid as a rock and impossible to cut normally. In a stroke of improvisation, the chef used a sharp knife to shave paper-thin slices from the frozen beef, as if planing wood shavings. These ultra-thin slices cooked instantly when placed in the pan. The chef then made a sauce from the sour cream and seasonings at hand, mixed it with the meat slices, and accidentally created a delicious dish. The third version sounds the most plausible and has received the most endorsement from historians. This is the open table legend. The protagonist is Count Stroganov, who during his tenure as governor in Odessa established a so-called open table at his official residence. This meant that any educated, presentably dressed person could walk into his home at any time and enjoy a free meal. This was a fashionable social practice of the time for displaying aristocratic generosity and status. to cope with the constant flow of guests and ever-changing numbers. His chef invented a dish that was quick to prepare, delicious, and very easy to portion into individual servings, well suited for this semi-buffet style setting. That dish was beef stroganoff. These three stories are like three different menus, take your pick. And in Russia, there is one thing whose status as undisputed king is beyond question. It is typically served in an elegant crystal bowl resting on crushed ice, with a small spoon made of mother-of-pearl or bone beside it. It is caviar, but for a very long time in history, caviar in Russia was actually a very cheap, one might even say unremarkable, common food. Let us return to the banks of the Volga River in the 12th century. At that time, the river and the connected Caspian Sea were home to enormous populations of sturgeon. These ancient, living fossil-like fish were the most important food source for the fishermen along the banks. They caught sturgeon, ate its flesh, and also ate the roe packed inside its belly. Because the yield was so great, these fish eggs were practically worthless. People mixed them with kasha, or simply ate them by the bowlful, like rice. Sturgeon roe. Thus just a high-protein, energy-boosting everyday food, no different from potatoes or bread. So how did this fisherman's staple climb step by step to the very summit of the gastronomic pyramid, becoming the pearls of the Tsar? This transformation began in the 16th century. It is said that Tsar Ivan the Terrible was very fond of eating sturgeon. At his table, the refined black sturgeon roe became a highly prized delicacy. Royal taste naturally set the trend for the entire nation. And so caviar's status gradually rose, moving from the commoner's table into the aristocracy's field of vision. But what truly sent its price skyrocketing was economic law. As trade between Russia and Europe grew ever more frequent, this black gold from the East began to be exported to France, England, and other countries. European royalty and nobility were immediately captivated by its unique flavor. The explosive surge in demand, combined with the drastic decline in sturgeon populations in the Volga and Caspian Sea due to overfishing, together drove the price of caviar to staggering heights. Caviar itself is also graded. The most premium is beluga caviar, the largest grains, pale gray in color, the most delicate in texture. Next is Osetra caviar, medium-sized grains, ranging in color from brown to gold, with a nutty flavor. Finally, there is Sevruga caviar, the smallest grains, the darkest color, and the most intense, briny flavor. In the past, these names referred to different species of wild sturgeon. Today, they are more commonly used to describe the grade and flavor profile of farmed caviar. Now, we have discussed many dishes. Let us pull our gaze back a bit further. You have tasted the warmth of cabbage soup, the simplicity of kasha, the refinement of French cuisine, and witnessed the abundance of the King table. But to truly understand the aristocratic table of Tsarist Russia, you must understand one final thing, the most important thing of all: the complex and exacting set of unspoken rules that permeated the table and everything around it. You are seated at a grand dinner. The gentlemen around you wear immaculate tailcoats. The ladies are dressed in magnificent evening gowns. The air carries not only the aroma of food, but also a tense, solemn sense of ceremony. Here, eating is not merely eating, it's a carefully choreographed social drama in which every gesture and every glance is laden with meaning. First, the seating. The seating arrangement is the host's most painstaking concern, for it directly reflects the guest's social standing. The most honored position is to the host's right, followed by the left, then descending in rank from there. Married couples are usually separated, with men and women seated alternately to encourage broader social conversation. Sitting in the wrong seat is a grave affront to both host and fellow guests. Then comes dining etiquette. Before you lies a row of gleaming knives and forks, and you have no idea where to begin. The rule is to work from the outside in one set of utensils per course. The knife is always in the right hand, the fork always in the left, even if you are only using a fork to eat. You must not switch it to your right hand. During the meal, Both hands must remain visible above the table at all times. Your wrists may rest lightly on the table's edge, but you must never place your hands below the table. This is considered very impolite. When drinking soup, the spoon should scoop away from you, not toward you, as the latter is considered a gesture of greed. And absolutely no sound must be made. Bread is typically placed directly on the tablecloth. There is no dedicated bread plate. You may tear off a small piece by hand, but you must not bite directly into a whole slice. When a course is finished, the knife and fork are placed side by side horizontally across the plate, fork tines facing up, knife blade turned inward. This is the signal to the servants. I am finished. You may clear my plate. However, among all these rules, the most central and most distinctly Russian is the ritual of the toast. At Russian banquets, alcohol is not for solitary sipping. It is a social tool, a catalyst for collective emotion. The entire evening is punctuated by countless toasts. The host toasts first, then the guest of honor. After that, every guest may take turns standing to say a few words. The toast can be long, poetic, or witty and humorous, but regardless of content, the ritual is fixed. When someone is making a toast, everyone must stop what they are doing and look at the speaker. When the speaker raises the glass, you must raise yours as well. The most distinctive rule of all, during a toast, your eyes must maintain constant eye contact with the person being toasted from the moment you raise your glass, through drinking until you set the glass back on the table. Your gaze must not waver. This is considered a way of expressing sincerity and respect. After drinking, everyone rises and says to your health, then drinks it all in one go. Refusing to participate in a toast is considered a grave offense. You watch this silent performance, guests elegantly wielding their knives and forks, delivering impeccable toasts, every detail flawless. You understand now, the true protagonist of this dinner is not the food, it is order. From the relaxed informality of the appetizers, to the rigid hierarchy of the main course, to the collective revelry of the toasts, the entire evening's rhythm is precisely controlled. It is like a carefully designed ritual, breaking down barriers at the start, reaffirming hierarchy during the middle, and concluding with collective unity and emotional resonance. This is not merely a meal, it is the perfect embodiment of the worldview of Russia's 19th century aristocratic Class A world, both longing for European refinement and order, yet unable to relinquish Russian emotion and exuberance. Contradictory, yet utterly captivating.